Nobody took old Pete seriously. At 72, watering flowers and mowing lawns, he was just an elderly gardener. Young lieutenants would laugh when they saw him, saying mockingly, "Old Pete's working again." To them, he was just an old man collecting a paycheck until that morning when the commanding general saw him and snapped to attention. And that's when everyone realized that the man who had been gardening for 15 years was one of the most legendary commanders in the U.S. Armed Forces. Welcome to Daily Story. Before we continue this powerful story of disrespect, prejudice, and long overdue recognition, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. Fort Braxton, located outside Fayetteville, North Carolina, was one of the most prestigious installations in the U.S. Armed Forces. With its spacious courtyards, orderly buildings, and immaculate landscaping, it looked like a garden. Behind this beauty, one man had been working quietly for 15 years, Pete Williams. Old Pete was the gardener everyone knew and no one valued. At 72, medium height, with slightly hunched shoulders, he was an elderly man. He arrived every morning at 0600 hours and left at 1700. He always carried the same old shovel, a plastic watering bucket beside him, and a faded cap on his head. Even though the base's gardens were his creation, no one appreciated them. Flower beds, lawn areas, tree pruning, everything came from old Pete's hands. But to the young officers, he was just the gardener. Pete ate in his small shed, drank his coffee, and then got back to work. He never complained, never argued with anyone. He would say, "Yes, sir, roger that, Lieutenant," even to young second lieutenants. Even the base command staff barely noticed him. To them, Pete was part of the scenery. Someone who was supposed to be there, but wasn't. The young officers serving at the base were mostly between 25 to 30 years old. Recent graduates, energetic and trying to prove themselves. Their behavior toward Pete was far from pleasant. Lieutenant Mike Johnson, 26 years old, is a West Point graduate. When he saw Pete, he would usually start giving orders. "Pete, plant those flowers more orderly. The general's coming." "Pete, the lawn mower is too loud. Work more quietly."
"Pete, finish this job faster.
"We have work to do." Pete never talked back, just nodded and did his work. First Lieutenant Kevin Martinez was even harsher. At 28, he had a tough temperament. "Old Pete, what did you do in the army? Were you a gardener? Old Pete, did you ever see combat?" These questions were usually asked to amuse his friends. Watching Pete's reaction, seeing his simple responses, entertained them. The worst was Lieutenant Brad Thompson. At 25, he had finished military school with family connections.
"Old Pete, how much do you get paid?"
"Less than us." "Old Pete, what if you retired? You're not useful anyway." These words deeply hurt Pete, but he never showed it. Pete's day always started with the same routine. Arriving at 0600, he would first water the flowers. Then he'd start mowing the lawn. During the half-hour lunch break, he'd eat the meal he brought in his shed. The hardest part was the constant orders from young officers. He had to leave one job half-finished to start another. "Pete, urgently trim that tree. The colonel's coming."
"Pete, pick up this trash."
"We have visitors."
"Pete, change those flowers. They look old."
Despite being 72, Pete tried to fulfill these orders. His heart sometimes strained, and he got short of breath, but he didn't complain. When he returned home in the evening, he was tired and sad. His wife had passed away, and his children lived in other states. He lived alone in his small house. But the next day, he would come again, face the same disrespect, and endure again. After 15 years, a major change occurred at the base. A new commanding general was assigned, Brigadier General Robert Hayes. At 52, he was an experienced and respected commander. General Hayes was making his first tour to examine the base. Base staff accompanied him. He noticed the beauty of the gardens. "Who maintains these gardens?" he asked. "Old Pete," said Colonel Martinez. "He's been working here for 15 years. He's done beautiful work. I'd like to meet him." At that moment, Pete was watering flowers in the distance. The general started walking toward him. When General Hayes approached Pete, the old man noticed him. He put down his hose and tried to stand straight. "Good morning," the general said in a calm voice. "Good morning, sir," Pete said, bowing his head. "I'm your new commanding general, Robert Hayes."
Pete was surprised.
The commanding general was introducing himself to him. "You've created a very beautiful garden. Congratulations."
Thank you, sir.
The general looked at Pete more closely. There was something different in the old man's posture, his gaze.
A military bearing.
How long have you been working here? 15 years now, sir. Where did you work before?
Pete hesitated.
I came here after retiring. Retired from what?
Another hesitation.
Government service, sir. General Hayes sensed there was something behind these answers. But he didn't press further at that moment. That evening, General Hayes requested Pete's file in his office. The file that arrived was very brief.
Pete Williams. Age, 72. Occupation, gardener.
Start date, 2008.
Note, retired.
Security clearance conducted. But the security clearance file wasn't detailed. It just said cleared. The general couldn't let go of the military posture and demeanor he saw in Pete. He called Human Resources. Research Pete Williams's retirement background. Which institution did he retire from? Sir, this information doesn't come up with normal searches. Special clearance may be required. Then get special clearance. 2 days later, a classified file arrived at General Hayes's desk. Classified special access was written on the file. When he opened the file, what he saw shocked him. Colonel Pete Williams. Rank, Colonel retired. Years of service, 1968 to 2007. Units, Special Forces, Rangers. Operations, Vietnam War, 1968 to 1975, Grenada, 1983, Panama, 1989, Desert Storm, 1991, Afghanistan, 2001 to 2005. Medals, Silver Star, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Distinguished Service Cross. Special notes, 39 years of continuous service. 127 successful operations. Never lost personnel under his command. General Hayes closed the file and took a deep breath. The man who had been gardening at the base for 15 years was a retired colonel who outranked him. There was another note in the file, retirement reason, depression following spouse's death. Retired early by own request. General Hayes thought about how to handle this situation. He didn't want to embarrass Pete in front of everyone. But at the same time, he needed to ensure the respect owed to him was shown. The next day, he called for a general meeting at the base. All officers were required to attend. General meeting tomorrow at 0900 hours. All officers will attend. The young officers didn't understand what was happening. Was an important announcement going to be made? On the day of the meeting, all officers gathered in the base's main hall. General Hayes took the podium. Gentlemen, he said in a serious voice. Today, we'll discuss an important topic. About conduct rules and respect. The hall was silent. I've learned that some personnel in this unit have been disrespectful to other employees. This is unacceptable. Young officers looked at each other. Particularly, we'll discuss the disrespect shown to Gardener Pete Williams. Lieutenant Johnson, First Lieutenant Martinez, and Lieutenant Thompson began to worry. Now I'll tell you who Pete is. Pete Williams, the general said in a heavy voice, is retired Colonel Pete Williams, who served 39 years in the U.S. Armed Forces. Deep silence fell over the hall. He was a Special Forces company commander during the Vietnam War. He participated in operations in Grenada, Panama, and Desert Storm. He served in Afghanistan for 4 years. The young officers' faces paled. He is a recipient of the Silver Star, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and Distinguished Service Cross. Lieutenant Johnson's hands began to tremble. After losing his wife in 2007, he fell into depression and retired early at his request. He's been working here since 2008. The hall was frozen. I've learned that some of you call him Old Pete, give him orders and mock him. First Lieutenant Martinez lowered his head. Colonel Williams has served more and sacrificed more than all of you combined. After the meeting, General Hayes called 3 young officers to his office, Lieutenant Johnson, First Lieutenant Martinez, and Lieutenant Thompson. Sit down, he said in a cold voice. All 3 sat silently. Tell me one by one how you treated Colonel Williams. Lieutenant Johnson began with a trembling voice, General, we didn't know. If we had known. Not knowing is not an excuse. Showing respect to an elder is a basic human rule. First Lieutenant Martinez confessed, General, we mocked him. We looked down on him. I also know how you implemented the orders I gave you. You ran Colonel Williams around. Lieutenant Thompson began to cry, General, we're very ashamed. What can we do?
First, you'll go and apologize to him.
Then you'll completely change your behavior. That afternoon, the three young officers went to the garden where Pete was working. The old man was watering flowers.
Lieutenant Johnson approached first. Pete.
Colonel, may we speak with you?
Pete was surprised.
They were calling him Colonel for the first time.
Of course, sir.
Colonel, we treated you badly, not because we didn't know, but we're very sorry. Pete smiled. It's in the past, boys. I made mistakes when I was your age too. First Lieutenant Martinez continued, Colonel, would you tell us about your memories from those days? There's a lot to tell, Pete said. But it's in the past. Lieutenant Thompson asked, Colonel, why didn't you tell us your identity? Pete took a deep breath. Boys, my military service is over. Now I just want peace. From that day on, everything changed at the base. Pete was now called Colonel Pete. Young officers treated him with respect and tried to benefit from his experience. General Hayes arranged a special office for Pete. You can rest here if you want. Pete accepted but said he wanted to continue gardening. I love this work. Flowers don't lie. Young officers now listened to his stories. Pete would sometimes tell them, sometimes say, some things aren't told, they're lived. General Hayes asked Pete to train the young officers. Colonel Pete, would you share your experiences?
Pete accepted.
He began giving leadership lessons to young officers once a week. Leadership isn't in rank, it's in character, he would say. A person must first learn to manage himself. Lieutenant Johnson had now become his closest student. Colonel, how did you become so patient?
Patience comes with experience, son.
Every mistake has a lesson. First Lieutenant Martinez asked, so why do you still do gardening?
Because every job has honor.
There's no such thing as small work or big work.
2 years passed.
Pete's health began to deteriorate. He had reached 74 and was tired. One day, he spoke with General Hayes. General, perhaps it's time for me to retire completely. Colonel Pete, you're very valuable to us. But the lessons I gave these young men are enough. Now they'll find their way. A farewell ceremony was organized for Pete. All base personnel attended. Lieutenant Johnson, First Lieutenant Martinez, and Lieutenant Thompson spoke at the ceremony. Colonel Pete taught us the greatest lesson, Lieutenant Johnson said. True greatness comes with humility. First Lieutenant Martinez added, he taught us respect and understanding. Lieutenant Thompson said the final words, and he showed us that real value isn't in rank, but in character. At the ceremony, Pete said, Dear boys, I served 39 years in the military and 15 years as a gardener. I learned a lot from both. My only advice to you, don't look down on anyone. Everyone has a story, everyone has value. A plaque was placed under the large oak tree in the base garden. In memory of Colonel Pete Williams. True greatness lies in humility. 1951-. Even after Pete retired, he continued to visit the base. Young officers still welcomed him with respect when they saw him.
What does this story teach us?
We cannot judge someone without knowing who they are. Maybe your neighbor, maybe the man at the grocery store, maybe the woman sitting next to you on the bus. They all have a story, they all have value. So, have you ever encountered such a situation? Did you learn that someone you looked down on was someone very important? Share your experiences in the comments. Tell us which city you're watching from. If this story added something to your life, subscribe and support this channel. Because at Daily Story, we remind you of the importance of respect and understanding. See you in the next story. And remember, true greatness is hidden in humility.